about mythic tales is that they are humanity's way of processing very abstract and deep lessons about the nature of reality over the course of centuries. Some of the types of challenges and lessons that humanity faces are they're so complicated and they're so abstract that in a single lifetime, even sometimes in multiple generations of people, we don't fully work the detail of it out. But as a people, as a family, as a world family, we've pretty much worked everything out over the course of all these centuries. And the answers come to us symbolically through mythic tales. So, this is the tale, it's one of my favorite parts of the Ramayana. It's the tale of Sita's Swayamvara. And a Swayamvara is like a special party for a young lady when it's time for her family to decide who she's going to marry. That's the way it was done back in India. And so, yeah, oh yeah, she does decide. But there's a test. The thing is, Sita's father was a king, King Janaka, and he had in his possession something very special. He owned or was in possession of the bow of Shiva. You can imagine Shiva being a god, that was like a big bow. And it was a thing. And he decided that on a particular auspicious day, that any man who could come, anybody who could lift that bow and bend that bow and string the string on that bow would be sufficiently brilliant enough that his daughter would, could consider him. So it just happened by happen chance that even though this word went out across the land and all kinds of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people, well, not hundreds of thousands, but probably hundreds at least, everything from demons to kings and princes to Brahmins to all kinds of great people came. Ram happened to be passing through the city at that time on a trek that he was making. Just happened. And just happened by the suggestion of the rishi or the wise man he was traveling with to maybe just go ahead and see what was going on at the Swayamvara. So he went over there. And as you can imagine, the story is a classic story. Everyone went up and tried to bend the bow, and not only could they not bend it, they couldn't even move it. I mean, it was big. They couldn't even budge it an inch. But of course, Ram walks up and he picks up the bow like nothing, and he bends the bow. He bends it so far he breaks it. Sita's very impressed. She's like, I want that guy. So that took care of that. But this is where the story gets really interesting. Ram is an incarnation of Vishnu, the manifestation of Dharma. Vishnu has another manifestation called Parashuram. And Parashuram's, one of his jobs was to protect the bow of Shiva, make sure nobody breaks it. So of course, the sound of the breaking bow travels across the whole universe. And of course, Parashuram, in some deep state of meditation, suddenly realizes that the bow that he was trying to protect has just been broken by someone. And so in a fit of anger, Parashuram being a little bit famous for having fits of anger anyway, he strings his own bow and arrow and he goes racing into that Swayamvara to get the guy who broke the bow. But of course, something so interesting happens at that spot, right? Because what we've got is we've got one being, and we all, when I talk about the causal level of creation, that's a level of being that we all share. When we talk about being, the source of creation, we all share. So here what we've got is a setup. We've got being, and it's manifesting on one side to break the bow of Shiva, and it's manifesting on the other side to protect the bow of Shiva. And the two are not in harmony with each other. So it's an interesting moment. So a couple of things happen that really illustrate beautifully the mechanics of what we do in order to establish Dharma. First of all, Ram knows he's Vishnu incarnate. Parashuram also knows that, but when they look at each other, they see divinity. So Parashuram's standing there with his bow and arrow drawn, and he's looking at his own divinity, and he's like, oh, I can't really shoot myself. I can't shoot Vishnu. That would be wrong. But once the bow has been strung, you have to use it. And the thing about anger is it's going to cut. No matter what you do, it's going to have a cutting effect. It just is. So he says to Ram, he kind of bows down to Ram, Parashuram bows to Ram and says, what should I do with my arrow? It's like strung and I definitely don't want to shoot you with it. And so Ram says, let's shoot it into small ego, which is in the east. Just shoot it to the east and it will eliminate small ego. It's a very interesting point because what it means is that there's an element of small ego that's responsible for the anger expressing itself in an indiscriminately destructive manner. And when that piece of ego is eliminated, it allows for the discrimination, and that's the whole act of shooting the arrow toward a specific spot which resides at a fine level of creation, right? Because the ego isn't even physical, right? So it's like he's directing the arrow to a fine level of self in order to take it out very, pluck it, like the surgeon's knife. And we talked about that last time, the difference between hot and cold anger, which I've been really, really enjoying working with over the last couple of weeks since the concept came up. So the difference between hot and cold anger also ties in to the difference between addressing situations from a dharmic position versus addressing from an adharmic or karmic position. Oh, there's one more little juicy aside to that story, and that is, this would be the night before Ram marries Sita, basically, right? Because that's the Swayamvara, and she chooses him, and the next thing that happens in the story is they get married. And it's interesting that it's Ram himself goes through a transformation at that moment with that arrow from Parashuram, taking out that piece of ego that would possibly cause friction between himself and Sita, right? Because if he's coming into any kind of situation in the relationship with that kind of fiery, destructive anger, it wouldn't be good for the marriage. So it's kind of interesting that it happens right at that, because that kind of event could have happened anywhere in the Ramayana, but it happened right there. And it shows that even Ram, even the God, has to go through, the manifestation of God, has to go through an evolutionary transformation as part of his process of stepping with grace into his next position like that. So I'm holding silence just for a moment because I want to come back to the healing. Checking in with the ancestors. I think everything is looking very good there. It's looking beautifully transformed. Seeing the light of being, the grace of God, moving through these layers of the ancestral physiologies, at least 8 layers for everybody. Etheric, through causal. Brings up a little point from a download I was getting just minutes before this healing began, is I realized that when life is able to move progressively forward with grace, there's a very distinctive energy form present. It's like having the blessings of the divine all the time. And so our healing circle is receiving this structure. The structure seems to be connected to or associated with the causal body as spaces. And that's something, if anybody wants to explore on YouTube, I've got a video on causal body and how, as humans, we approach it or look at it from 3 different angles. You can look at it as spaces, you can look at it as vibrations, or you can look at it as humming spaces, which are basically beings, right? So the mythic tales shine a light of awareness on the causal level of self as beings. We identify with the hero. But now we're looking as a space. And I'm seeing it both slightly as a space and also in the junction between a space and a vibration, in a junction between a space and a vibration. And that quality of the cosmic administrator, Ram, the cosmic administrator, is the essence of that energy, Dharma incarnate. And as that's happening, another thing that's going on, that's sort of starting to add into this, the mix of this healing, is the fact that our collective, by looking all of us together into this Dharma, into the cosmic administrator, is starting to wake up a level of creative intelligence from the deepest level of creation sufficient to promote healing directly for Dharma. It's a little bit like shooting the arrow, Parashuram, shooting his arrow into a subtle level of creation and using it to actually heal something rather than destroy something. Or in the destruction process, it also purifies. So I'm looking at that. The overseeing organization of it is coming from pure being, in that luscious gap between silence folded in on its own nature and silence awake to its own nature. Right there in that spot, the value of transformation is so great. It's so irresistible. And it is so absolutely perfectly aligned, perfect expression of cosmic intention. It's mothers at home to the extreme degree that literally whatever the child does is just fine. It's just perfect. He comes in covered in mud, good. Draw the bath. He falls down and hurts himself. Come here. I love you. I'll blow on it. Just, you know, just is something, there's a level of perfection there. It's like no matter what, it transcends all the imbalances and imperfections of creation. So this sort of luscious space, that's where the rocking of the cradle of Krishna is in that space between I'm just in the silence and I'm like going to come out and do something, and I'm just in the silence. I'm going to come out and do right there. And so it's becoming very, very lively. And one of the things I'm seeing happening for us as individuals as that happens is a very nice, very, I would say, graceful and sort of tender, very appropriate and delicate activation of the creative intelligence in the deeper chakras of the physiology. Earth chakras, root chakra, second chakra, third chakra, these areas. We've done a lot of work with the heart and mind in previous webinars, and that's all good stuff. But expressions of creative intelligence through the deeper, more earthy, more associated with our humanity, right? Because our minds are associated with our dreams and our thoughts and our creative work, you know, and our hearts are associated with our service to the collective and so forth. But the basti area, the gut area, and the reproductive organs and all that is more like we're connections to the earth, and we're connections to the manifest, feet on the ground, stable, manifest level of creation, to our earth, to our physical environment and our physical world. Good. This is important because this healing that's being promoted by our collective right now is directing toward in a very pragmatic way, a healing for the administrative structures of creation as they reside at a universal level. So Dharma, as it resides in the whole universe. Dharma. The whole universe is going through the different epochs of time, right? Kali Yuga isn't just on Earth. Kali Yuga is in the whole universe. And in Kali Yuga, 3 of the legs of the bull of Dharma are broken. So the bull of Dharma is also requires support. I'm seeing this really, really, really interesting interface going on between the quality that we would call Vishnu and the quality that we would call Shiva, because Shiva rides the bull, right? So that's very abstract. And all I can say is it reflects the deliciousness that's in that gap between the silence in its essential state and the silence awakened and ready to pounce. In there, that relationship between those 2 forms is incredibly rich. And it is enjoying its reality right now. So these 2 values, as they are self-interacting values of the one being of creation, are awakening in our physiologies as a unique means by which we divide up our causal bodies.